Hello and welcome back to my channel. I am recording this video today because there were several comments on a couple of my previous YouTube videos about using hybrid and VaporSynth to process media. And those comments were related to not necessarily knowing the best practices for transferring and digitizing the media to begin with. And I think that's a really critical missing component. So anyway, this goes out to you guys. In terms of my own experience, this is my best practices. And please take this for what it's worth and steal and appropriate whatever of these components into your own workflow, whatever works best for you. But just rest assured, this is not the one way to do it. This is just how I understand is the best practice for my own workflow. So the way I see it, there are two primary paths that you can take when you want to transfer or digitize your archival media. You can either go to a laboratory like Metropolis Post in New York City, a reputable facility that maintains their equipment very well and will capture to any format and method that you request. I request anytime I'm working with Metropolis Post, I've worked with them for years, I request if it's a library or an artist organization, they have very strict standards that you have to abide by, uncompressed YUV 422. There are other organizations that work with different codecs. You may have to capture in a different way. The primary and important thing to remember is that you don't want to capture with composite. You want to capture with component, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And most professional facilities, that laboratories will do that, but you need to specifically say that and request the specs and have a conversation with them in the email before you pay for the service and have them start, because it depends. There are businesses that are like family video digitization services that they're just using a USB dongle. I've been to them, I've seen them, and they're just basically taking the composite right out of the back of the VCR and USB in, and then putting it into an MPEG-4 file. And that's a terrible way to destroy the media. I don't recommend that. And that's the method I think a lot of people think if they're going to do it themselves. They have a VCR, so they're like, okay, I've got RCA out, the little yellow and red and white cables, I could capture audio and video and then go right into USB, and it goes into my hard drive on my laptop, and then I can use some software to then edit those videos or do what you will with them. And that is not the way I capture. That is not the way I do it, because that destroys the image. And I'll get into that in a second on why that's important. But before I move on to the more technical side, let's finish talking about the labs. I think, so Metropolis Post, I can speak highly of them because I've used them for years. I've been to their facility. I know their people. They're all professionals. It's some magical laboratory in there. Like, there's people tinkering with big film transfer machines, and there's like 100 tape decks, and the people that work on these machines have a lot of experience, and it takes a lot of skills, mechanical skills, to maintain the equipment. They don't manufacture this equipment anymore, so there's only a few of these decks remaining in the world, and you have to cannibalize parts from old machines to replace the parts in the newer machines with fewer miles on them. And so it takes a lot of skill, and that's why there are very few people that can do it right. And that's just the reality of it. And that's the cold, hard truth that I came to discover whenever I became interested in adding like tape transfer services to my services that I offered as a small post business.
I had an idea like that once, a long time ago.
And that's when I started reaching my technical limits when I took on a job a few years ago, and I was working with media that I had never even heard of before, like half-inch audio, reel-to-reel half-inch audio. I've never worked with that before. I didn't know the technical intricacies of that format. I didn't have the equipment for it or the skills to even operate it, even if I had the equipment. So that's when I reach out for help and talk with someone who's an expert. Now, Metropolis Post is great if you want to transfer film, if you've got old 8mm, Super 8mm film from your family archive. If you have any tape format, they'll take it. They will take any format. However, the primary difference between Metropolis Post and, say, someone like Mercer Media or the Standby program run by Bill Seary is that Metropolis Post, they don't have all the machines to capture all the formats. If you have, so for example, the documentary Summer of Soul, that was actually recorded on 2-inch magnetic tape way back in the day. How many of those 2-inch machines are still around today, and how many people know how to operate them? There are very few people in the world that know how to operate them, and there are very few machines that know that run them. It's actually a pneumatic machine, runs off of air compression, and maintaining it is, it's like being a car mechanic. It's a lot of skills, and that skill set is dying out. It's unfortunate, but the few people that have that knowledge in their brain, they're really worth their weight in gold to our community. So I just wanted to give them a shout out by, raising their website on this channel. This is a really cool, this is Bill Seary at Mercer Media, and he's a partner of Mercer Media. I think he does a lot for them. I don't want to speak for all of the services they offer or what that business arrangement is, but Bill Seary works with Mercer Media and the Standby program, and digitizes collections for like the Museum of Modern Art and some of the biggest collections in the world. And he also transferred the 2-inch reel-to-reel. He also removed the white mold by hand, like unreeled the entire, like unspooled the entire reel and cleaned off the mold by hand, and then rejuvenated the tapes in this oven. He baked it with a laboratory precise oven and rejuvenated it just for the transfer. And he also rejuvenated and maintained the machine. All I'm saying is respect to a lot of, that's a trade that takes a lifetime to learn. And so sometimes we work with formats that aren't necessarily within our reach. So that's when people like this come in. So the Standby program is also, I think it's a nonprofit 501c3. They do a lot of transfers for artists and libraries and art organizations that are sitting on these archives that don't necessarily have the money to transfer them, because it is an expensive process. I mean, VHS is like 40 or 50 bucks a tape if you want it done right and get the, the original source file. So anyway, that's the lab version. I recommend not going to the family home video transfer services unless you have a real conversation with them about the equipment that they're using. And, and we'll get to the technical specifications in just a minute, so that way you'll come into that conversation armed with a little more knowledge and know-how, so you know exactly what to request whenever you talk to the facility or lab to do your transfers. So before I go into the best practices that I recommend, which is basically based off of a number of white papers that we're going to talk about in a second, I think the important thing to know is that whenever you capture using, if you've VHS tapes or other analog format tapes and you have a deck to read those tapes, the method by which you connect that tape deck to your capture device, you have to make sure that the signal maintains its integrity as much as possible. So in this case, I think most people, when they think of capturing VHS tape, for example, for their family archive, they will use a USB to RCA adapter type device, right? Like, what is that company on Amazon? Elgato. I have a couple of them actually. I have them because I've experimented with them and just playing with them and cracking them open to see what kind of chip microprocessor is inside. But the thing to know about those devices is that they use something called composite, and composite is essentially, it's in its name. It essentially combines the luma and chroma information into one carrier or one signal essentially, and sends it down a very thin wire. And that becomes a problem because the chroma and luma are, in a way, they interfere with each other a little bit. And without going too deeply in the woods, you can read all about this in some white papers that have been published by both EMEA, which is the Association of Moving Image Archivists. And then there's also the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives. I have to read them because I get the two organizations mixed up all the time. And I can never remember their acronyms. But these are both like public-facing nonprofit organizations that have a ton of resources on their website, including publications. And I have geeked out on their publications and white papers for many years. There's also, let's see, the CCAAA Audiovisual Archives Association. This is another website that has a number of white papers that I've downloaded, and I keep all of these on my Google Drive. And the IASA, this is the guidelines for preservation of video recordings. And I headline this section of the video with this paper in particular because this talks about exactly what I'm discussing, component versus composite. And it lays everything out in detail for you, including S-video and the difference between S-video and composite and component. And the important thing about component is the signal's broken into 3 separate wires. It's got Luma on its own wire, and then CB and CR on their own. So it's essentially separating the signal so that they don't interfere with each other, and you typically find much better quality cables and equipment that's sending component down the line. So I would recommend capturing with component if you have the option to. S-video is also better than composite. So if you have a deck that only has S-video, then I would certainly find a way to transfer using S-video. But composite is the worst. It's the worst potential capture method. So beware. I'm saying just beware of the file form, those devices that you get on Amazon. And make sure that the software, that if you are going to purchase them because you have budgetary constraints, it's perfectly understandable. I mean, I started with these same devices and was tinkering with them. And I would just make sure that the software gives you the option to capture the original video with field lines intact. If it outputs a .mpeg4 file that's progressive, it's essentially just destroying your media. You want to at least have the field lines. You also want to be able to choose your own codec, potentially lossless, like an MOV ProRes or something. So libraries and arts organizations and universities and research institutes and these sort of big archives that have big budgets, they abide by the guidelines set out by AMIA and IASA and these other standards organizations. And those guidelines are uncompressed YUV422 10-bit. And that is, I don't know if you've done the math on that, but that's a big file. And it takes up a ton of hard drive space, and I can't afford that. You know, just, I don't know why hard drive space is not scaled like the rest of the computing industry. It's like it does not scale with Moore's law. So we are still limited by hard drive space, but large institutions can afford that. And also, if you're an art organization like MoMA, you have no excuse. You have to store people's art at master quality, at the highest quality possible that meet certain standards, so that you're not, you know, subject to lawsuits or liability and things like that. And also, it's just the highest quality. But you know, if you really get down into the bits and the bits and the bytes and the ones and the zeros, as someone who works with this media all the time, professionally, and really is deeply in the weeds, personally, I capture a ProRes or MKV with some lossless format that is not uncompressed. I can't take that. I don't have the hard drive space. So ProRes interlaced, maintain the original field lines, don't do any sort of recompression or anything like that. That's what you want to do. If you can get a tape deck that offers component out, then all the better. But then again, you know, if you're going to run your own tape deck and do that, you have to maintain the equipment. You should get an alignment tape and make sure and calibrate your tape machine and, you know, clean the heads. This is a pneumatic, it's like a 3/4 inch tape deck head. And you should clean these, and it's fun. Like getting into maintaining decks and transferring archival is like a tinkering game, and you can spend a lot of money on a lot of weird esoteric equipment, and spend a lot of money. Yeah, that's all I'm saying. just a fair warning. And it's also a skill that is highly valued right now, but it's also not going to be required for very much longer, sadly, because these tapes will eventually die. But we're not there yet. So this is going to be around for another few years. If you're going to do it to component. Now, if you're going to do a component, the other thing we didn't talk about is how you're going to capture it on the components. How are you going to capture it? Well, let's talk about that. So BlackMagic Design is a company. I've used their products for many years, and they're always solid, and I've used them for all my high-end professional work, and they've never let me down, so I can't speak highly enough about them. And I also think that they're competitively priced in terms of, for the product that you're getting. So that's what I'm going to recommend today. I think that there are definitely cheaper things on the market that you may be able to find on eBay or Amazon or AliExpress or something that captures analog formats, but I have not used them, so I can't speak for them. Now, the Intensity Pro 4K, I've never used the internal card, the one that I'm recommending today, even though I've said that I don't recommend things that I haven't used. But I have used the external version of this, and it works perfectly fine. And it's like plug and play with DaVinci Resolve and BlackMagic Design desktop software. So this is essentially an analog capture card that you can plug into your computer. If you don't have a PCIe option to install a card like this, like I said, they make an external version that plugs in via Thunderbolt or USB, and does the same thing. I think that there's a non-4K version you may be able to find on eBay and Amazon that's cheaper. If you don't necessarily need 4K. Obviously, if you're just doing archival, you don't necessarily need 4K. But this will capture your component in various formats, including S-video, and that allows you to keep your Luma and your Chroma separate. So if you're going to capture using the intensity card or the external bit into DaVinci Resolve, it's very straightforward. I mean, there's a couple of buttons in there in the user interface that you just follow the instructions, and it's all plug and play and compatible in Resolve. And the cool thing about capturing and logging in Resolve is you can build your whole archive in a way that it's organized and by directory, and you can browse it and apply color and looks to it. DaVinci Resolve is a fantastic media browser. Even if you're just using the free version, it's a very powerful media browser. Just know that the free version I don't think it's always compatible with all archival file formats. It's certainly compatible with ProRes and the usual suspects, but just keep that in mind. Now one thing I'm not for certain of, so DaVinci Resolve is free. I think they're on DaVinci Resolve 19 now, as of August 30th, but DaVinci Resolve Studio is not free. I think it's like over $200. It's almost $300, but you get the license for life. And you may want to double check before you purchase this card to make sure that you can use it with the free version. Something tells me that you cannot. Just to quickly say that this capture card works with a number of different familiar software packages that we all know and love. So this card, you don't necessarily have to have DaVinci Resolve to use this card to capture your tapes. So again, we're getting into purchasing and spending a little bit more money, but this would be, I think, the shortest distance between 2 points that maintains a strong component video integrity of the signal and fits within a workflow that's very comfortable and familiar to all of us, and will encode to ProRes or DNx HD. So that's a very streamlined, post-production friendly, media industry friendly workflow. I think, capturing component, if you got to do it, that's the way to go. But let's go one step further here and talk about something that is super cool and super geeky. Where's it at here? The Domesday Duplicator. It's Domesday, I think, but everybody says Doomsday, so I'm just going to call it Doomsday. And the reason why I like Doomsday is because it kind of calls to mind this idea that we need to capture all of our media before like Doomsday comes. But this is something that's super cool, and I am wanting to build one of these myself. It's on my to-do list on tinkering projects, but it's essentially a DIY project that was started by a couple of geeks in Britain that, based on the original Domesday project in the United Kingdom, they wanted to like develop a way to transfer and digitize archival and also Laserdisc, I think primarily, but any sort of file that is analog. They wanted to build a device that would essentially grab the RF signal, the raw RF signal coming out of the RF test point on a tape deck. So what's cool about that is now you can bypass the whole composite component S-video BS and just go straight for the RF and get the raw signal right off the tape. And it's like millions of samples per second. And you record that and it's like a raw format. Super cool. And they have a piece of software that you can use. I think it's LD Decode. Yeah. Which is also on, this is all like open source, by the way. Like they're just giving this stuff to the universe, not the components. I think you have to buy this thing or build it yourself. But the software and the tools for it are all like, I think all the publication is out. There's tons of literature, but it's like a significant difference in quality increase. And that's why I'm geeking out about it. You can read a little bit more about the project if you go to their website and you'll see what I'm talking about, but it's pretty sweet. But it's capturing the raw file and the raw RF signal, and then you can process that later. And what's cool about that is, in the spirit of maintaining the original field lines, now we're maintaining the original RF signal. So we can always, as the tool, as LD Decode develops and improves as an open source software project into the future, that's only going to give us the power to decode our RF signal at an even better quality and more fidelity. I just want to hop over to DVDs real quick because I know that that's a really popular topic as well. A lot of people have DVD material. I use MakeMKV for my DVDs, but you can install it on Windows, Mac, and run it in command line or through a GUI. And I run mine through command line because I do run scripts with it. So that's really cool. But the interesting thing about MakeMKV is that it basically creates a one-to-one copy of your DVD without re-encoding it to anything else. And you can even, with your command line, you can even specify the codec that you want to use and the specific quality and certain settings that you want. You can set that script up in your command line and run that, or run it as a script. So it's a very powerful tool, and it's a great way to capture your DVD lossless. And it's actually, if you want to use the graphical user interface tool, it's like a couple of buttons. It's very simple. It's also region agnostic for those of you who have DVDs in multiple regions and you're worried about the whole copyright thing. But of course, that's if you own the media. And also, the other cool thing about MakeMKV is, like I said, you can incorporate it into scripting. So if you want to, let's say, rip a DVD and then have a watch folder set up for that MKV output, and then have the script automatically retranscode that using FFmpeg to any other codec like H.264, 265, or ProRes, DNx HD, whatever you want, you can have that output into a separate folder. So you can kind of automate this workflow and create multiple copies of a DVD into different codecs for your library. Sometimes people like having a MPEG-4 smaller H.264 version of their higher quality lossless version that they want in the same folder, so that it's a little more easy to browse using a browser on like a browser-based interface, or let's say your TV if you want to have it plugged into your Plex Media server or something like that.
Get me the video cassette of Spaceballs the movie. Yes, sir.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to point out regarding MakeMKV is that, the MKV file format is open source. It's like the open source sibling of ProRes, but it's not always compatible with all software. So you might want to double check with your NLE to make sure that it's compatible with that format. But that's the format that I prefer to work with because I'm using command line interface and open source and FFmpeg, and like these are all open source tools, and it's all interchangeable. So it fits into my pipeline, and that may fit into your pipeline too. And if so, then that's great. But I understand if there is another DVD ripping tool that you prefer that goes straight to ProRes, then I would use that. I can't necessarily speak to all of the different DVD ripping tools out there, but the tool that I created, I call it Zack the Ripper, and it uses MakeMKV, and it has sort of an assembly line automated process of ripping to MKV, which is effectively lossless one-to-one clone of the disk, including maintaining and retaining the field lines and all of that stuff in the metadata, and then and transcoding that to ProRes or any other format that I require. But usually it's ProRes for my clients. So that's my workflow. So if you're feeling inspired and you want to dig a little bit deeper into the deep geeky aspects of this stuff, I could recommend starting nowhere else other than Dr. Charles Poynton. He's written a couple of books, and his website has a ton of resources and publications. You could just start there for free. He did write a book called Digital Video in HD, because he's one of the first. Also doubles as a home defense weapon, by the way, if you happen to have a particularly curious and geeky burglar in your neighborhood. But he basically was one of the guys that wrote the standards for HD and conceptualized the concept of the square pixel. So, kind of an OG. But his books are cool, and his publications are really cool. Tons of free stuff on the internet. He's very giving of his time, and there's some cool social media stuff and YouTube videos from him. He also teaches a great course through FX PhD on imaging science, color science, and things like that. So I can highly recommend taking those courses. So there's some other publications out there that I found. Maybe I'll save you some time searching the interweb for some of this stuff. But there's the Magnetic Tape Storage and Handling, a guide for libraries and archives. I think they got this from the National Media Laboratory. Let's see, the Video Tape Preservation Handbook by Jim Wheeler. This is like an old classic and has a ton of information. It's free online. AMIA, the Association of Moving Image Archivists, have a ton of publications. There are tape preservation guidelines, magnetic tape preservation guidelines. I think it comes in like 5 different PDF documents. It's a series. A lot of these come in series because it's quite dense. I mean, if you were to print all this stuff out, it would be a home defense weapon. So this is yet another publication, totally free. It talks about how to maintain your equipment and what to watch out for and things like this. So again, this is for the people that want to DIY it. One other thing I forgot to mention was that you want to make sure that you also digitize and add any sort of metadata or any information that's written on the tape. So this, for example, this is a VHS tape, and it comes with a little information written on the spine, and there's also a little document inside that has some information giving the future watcher or person who's going to transfer it. It gives them a little more context for the scene, the date, who's involved, where we're at, these sorts of things. Those should all be incorporated into your manifest. Again, in my previous videos, I've mentioned making manifests, and so you want to add that metadata. So make sure you add that, because that may help you. If you even know what sort of camera was used or where it was captured, you should put that in the metadata as well. There are libraries, like software that's been developed for library to log and capture this sort of stuff, like PB Core. But you don't need any of that fancy stuff. You could just use a spreadsheet. So MiniDV, MiniDV is one of the few things that I could probably recommend that if you have a lot of it, it may be worth getting a deck yourself. I bought this deck here. This is a Sony this is a HVR 1500. I bought this a few years ago, and I maintain it, and I capture tapes for not only captured my wife's entire archive, but my own, and then I've captured some archives for some friends and some clients. But I typically tend to shy away from capturing and transferring services.
It's the worst idea I've ever heard in my life, Tom.
Yes, it's horrible.
Because Media is precious to people, and I don't have the right maintenance equipment on site to deal with it myself. And it's a huge liability. You're like, wow, this is priceless. There's like 1,000 tapes here, and this is priceless. It becomes kind of a thing when you turn it into a business. But if you're doing it yourself, you take on the risk yourself, and that's, your own assessment. And then, so at that point, it's the Wild West. So the tape decks for DV, they're pretty awesome. This tape deck is pretty compatible. I think there's some DVC Pro stuff that it doesn't do, but it pretty much does the job. And with DV, it's a one-to-one clone. If you use Premiere Capture on a Windows versus a Mac, you'll get two different file formats, and you should be aware of that. But I capture using dvgrab, using Linux. It's very simple, very open source. The reason I have this document in the background here is because this is my own post workflow best practices that I document. So if I have scripts that I write that I like, that happen to be successful, I'll notate those so that I can come back and use them in the future. I use dvgrab because it's open source and you can run it from command line. So therefore it plugs right into my automation and scripting workflows. So I can automate things and do batches versus say the GUI, which I could probably do. I don't know if there's GUIs made for it. I don't even know. Actually, I've never used them. I've only ever used the command line interface because it's so simple. For the DV, I've got an old Windows laptop that a buddy of mine gave me that has 1394 Firewire 4-pin cable out on the side. And I was like, this laptop is from like 2007. And I was like, you know what? I bet I could install Linux on that, just like a lightweight kernel, and then install dvgrab, and then I'll just be able to capture directly from the tape. Very easy, running a simple script. So I guess to sum up, I just want to make sure that that this was helpful and clear. You can capture it yourself. Just know that if you are going to capture, make sure that you use component and not composite. If you don't have component and S-video is an option, then that's a better option than composite. And if you don't have a VCR or any of that equipment, like I said, it's kind of an expensive game to get into if you feel like you're going to just buy this equipment for a few tapes. And I just recommend keeping out of the hassle and paying for the service if it's just a couple of tapes and you're not going to spend a ton of money. But be clear in your email to them on the specs. And we've discussed the specs. Always interlaced. Never want to deinterlace. Never transcode it to MPEG-4 or some sort of compressed quality codec. Always uncompressed or lossless. If you're going to do uncompressed and you're going to go that, and you got the hard drive space, uncompressed YUV 422 10-bit is pretty much the international standard for libraries, but that's pretty much the industry standard. If you are being a little more realistic and cognizant of your hard drive space, then ProRes is totally fine, in my opinion. It's lossless, effectively, but just ensure that you capture to interlaced format. Do not deinterlace when you're capturing. There's a million different ways to capture tapes. Like I said, there's different, there's Elgato USB adapters, and most of these companies there's like a software package that comes with it you have to install. It's usually for Windows systems, but some are for Mac as well. And like I said, those are okay, but just make sure that you don't deinterlace when you do that. And you just also be sure to know that you will lose quality if you go the composite route. The component route, you can get decks that were made fairly recently that have component options, and that's a great option if you've got a ton of tapes. If you've got all kinds of mix and match of formats, that's a tough nut to crack, because that means you're going to have to buy a bunch of different decks, do it yourself, and that can get expensive and takes up a lot of space, and then they're heavy. Man, these decks, whew. I live on the 3rd floor, brownstone walk up. I ain't gonna carry no SVHS deck from 1988 up my stairs. I'm not gonna do it, man. Sorry.